Hello and welcome to another episode of our blockchain gaming news roundup with me, Jenny Jordan, and co-host John Jordan. Hello, John. How are you?
Good. Yeah.
Good. It's Friday, 23rd of May. And we're going to keep on sort of a bit of the themes from last week as they are sort of carried over into this week. So last week we saw what they call Nine Lives Interactive, the Web3 game developer. They announced they were shutting down the Nyan Heroes game on Solana. This week, we have seen three major titles in the Web3 gaming space announcing that they're shutting down or they've already shut down. They are Tatsumeeko, Lumina Fates, they are Blast Royale, and which one was the third one?
Ember,
that's right, from Danish developer Bright Star Games. I guess the sort of thing that's been a bit striking is maybe people's arrogance more generally. They don't seem like people get angry, calling it rugs and this and that, and maybe understandably because some of these people have invested a lot of money, which is sort of one of the issues with Web3 games. You know, you invest in assets in the games, and then those games, unfortunately, find themselves having to shut down. All of them have sort of claimed lack of funding as the main reason they are shutting down, which clearly shows it's not cheap to to build and operate Web3 games or any game for that matter. You kind of made a really funny meme on the. I mean, it's obviously a serious issue, so it's not a funny joke, but it's kind of like the Coles and the Degens on Twitter. You know, they kind of call for those memes, don't they, to come out? Anyway, go into a little bit more detail, John. The sort of numbers and figures.
Yeah, well, as I'd like to do, sort of take a step backwards. I mean, obviously, everyone who's in the space remembers sort of 2021, 2022. You know, it's this massive boom, and I can't, whatever it was, how many sort of $1 billion was raised, specifically into sort of blockchain gaming. You know, people I knew at the time, I was obviously in the space and looking at investments as well, professionally, and you know. People who'd been startup people in games for like the last 20 years were saying, this is the easiest I've ever had to raise money. You sort of, just needed a deck or, and it's certainly if you'd had any experience in making games before, it was very, very easy because there was a lot of people trying to raise who hadn't had experience and they were raising money. So basically a ton of liquidity went into the market at that stage, obviously COVID as well. Games were really pumping off. Everyone was playing a lot of games. So a lot of growth was brought sort of forward into gaming. And Web3 was like, the next sort of, generally people thought that it was the next big thing. Even people like EA were talking about it as the future of gaming. Obviously all the NFT stuff was picking off and Axie Infinity, at its peak. So, a really sort of febrile time. And obviously, downstream of that, the situation has sort of changed a lot. In some ways it's sort of, crypto's done really well. Bitcoin hit an all-time high again this week, 111,000, whatever. But when it comes to gaming, I guess on the consumer side of crypto, what's happened since then is, people have cycled through NFTs. Some NFTs have sort of come back a little bit. Most of them have gone away. But now meme coins are this big thing. So sort of meme coins on Solana is sort of a big sort of meta now. And people talk about degens then, but people talk about degens as a more sort of legitimate sort of part of crypto now. And people say the only way to make money in sort of crypto, consumer crypto is target degens and stuff. So I'm not going to go into that argument now, but basically you had this sort of one-off time where people could raise, a certain sum of money. So it may seem to a lot of people, like raising $5 million is quite a lot of money to build a game or build a consumer app or a company or something. But I remember talking to someone at the time, I won't say who, he's been on my podcast several times, but he raised 10 million, and I was saying, you really need 10 million. He was like, this is the one opportunity we have to raise the money we need to keep us going for the next 5 years or whatever. I don't think I'm going to be able to raise this money again. Whereas lots of other people just said, I can get 3 or 5 million now, probably in a couple of years' time, I'll go back to my investors and raise another 5 million. That was sort of the assumption that I've got this money now, I won't really worry about the future too much. But some people, did think about that and sort of, felt like they needed a longer sort of runway. And basically what's happened is a lot of people who raised money it's wrong to say they shouldn't have raised money, but there were a lot of inexperienced teams who'd never made a game before. And we've sort of made this point many times. That, it's really hard to make a game just to actually make a game that you're sort of proud of and does what you wanted to do when you started out 3 years ago. That's a hard skill to have. And if you haven't made a game before, you don't have it. If you've been playing games all your life, you don't have that skill. This is a skill of taking a team and maybe falling out with your co-founders and some of them leaving and bringing in new people, and maybe the game's not working like you want it and maybe changing it. And this is even harder than just general software engineering, which is sort of generally seen as quite hard. So there's that. There's the aspect of blockchain where you're very open with everything that's going on. So that's sort of another sort of most game developers don't announce their game until a year before it comes out because they don't want to get copied, or they're not very sure about exactly what's going to happen. Whereas blockchain people are like, every time the CEO changes his underwear, it's sort of like a tweet out about what's going on. So that doesn't help in the long term either. And just a basic economic fact is, this is a very rough rule of thumb, but in my experience, if you have a team of 10, which is not a big team, to make a game, that's probably going to cost you around $1 million a year in sort of salaries and all the other sort of taxes that go around that, and equipment, and obviously maybe if you're going to shows, it's not just salaries, but that's sort of what you'd be thinking of. Obviously, if you're doing it in Vietnam, it'll be considerably cheaper. If you're doing it in San Francisco, it'll be considerably more expensive. But that's sort of a rough idea. So if you think of people raising $5 to $10 million 3 or 4 years ago, and if you're making a mobile game and your experience maybe get away with 10, or a browser game, but if you're making, like we mentioned, like Ember Sword, a really big, MMORPG, they're building their own tech, they're building their own sort of streaming engines and stuff. I don't know how many people they had, I'm sort of making up a little bit, but 50 wouldn't seem outrageous to do that project. Nyan Heroes, again, a big sort of 3D PC game using Unreal. I don't know how many they're using, how many people they had, but 50 wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if it was more than that. And obviously we have at the top end, we've had people like, Illuvium having 250, or Star Atlas having 200 people, bonkers numbers. Absolutely insane, no matter how much funding you've got. So very quickly, what seems like, $5 million is just sort of eaten up, not because anyone's rugging or anyone's overpaying. There may have been that, inexperienced teams don't manage treasury in terms of crypto treasury very well, and maybe they overhire and they get in some hotshot creative guy to do their do the vision, and they end up throwing it all away and just go with something else. That happens a lot. It's very easy to spend money when it's come easy. So basically all those projects, and I'm not saying I don't have any real inside information about any of those projects, but I think they were on the more professional side of what was going on. There was obviously clearly a lot of rugs and people who didn't have a clue, but those particular projects tried to do something. They had, in most cases, playable games. Nyan Heroes game, I didn't play a lot of it, but I played some of the play tests. Didn't, something interesting going on there, but, not sure it's going to be mass market. Ember Sword, I did play various versions of that game. Again, thought they were rather ambitious in what they were trying to do, and could they pull it off? Blast Royale, a bit less visionary, but, that game was playable, played it as well. So all those games were playable. No one rugged anything. That money was spent building those products. But then you get to the point where, you have a product, and, I guess none of those games were sort of formally released. They were in early access or doing play tests or something like that. But you very quickly, when you release those games, you get data back about how many people downloaded that game, how many people started playing it, how many people played it the next day, how many people played it the next day. So these retention data that everyone's always talking about. So you may have something like a D1, your day one retention. People downloaded the game and started playing it. Did they come back the next day? D7. If people downloaded the game, how many came back day 7? Day 30 is really seen as, the sort of the gold standard of, someone downloaded your game, how many were still playing after 30 days? And if those numbers are not good, and everyone knows roughly what good numbers are in that context, you just have it doesn't matter if 100 people love that game. You can't build that game big enough to monetize at a sufficient level. Even with blockchain, where you can monetize at a much higher level than most other games, because maybe people are buying NFTs or trading, or there's tokens, there's other monetization methods in there. But if you can't get enough people in there, and your game team costs you $1 million a year, and you're running out of money, you either have to go to investors and get more money, which you can't do, literally, or hardly anyone can do at the moment. Some people can. We'll go on to that. Or you need to be your game needs to be generating money, probably through in-app purchases or maybe some crypto stuff as well. But you need to generate that money. And if you only have 1,000 people playing your game after the 30 days after people have started playing it, you just can't you can't generate £1,000, $1,000 from 1,000 people for a year to keep your game going. So there is this sort of on the surface level, I'm sure lots of people could point holes in some of the games that are going live, and I'm sure the people making those games are much more aware than anyone else of the problems in their games because they've been trying to fix them. It just comes to a point where literally every month you have to pay salaries, and you're a company, and if you don't pay salaries and you're still hiring, still getting people to work for you, you basically get sent to prison. That's the situation in most countries. You have a legal level of responsibility for your staff, and you're paying them salaries, and in some places you're paying their healthcare. And if you've only got if you only got the cash for the next month of salaries, then you basically have to tell everyone, sorry, we haven't got any money, you need to go and find another job. So basically, this stuff sort of happens, and to some degree, be sort of careful what I say. The sort of games we're seeing going bust, I'm not really surprised that those companies have run out of money. One, because I don't think they stood out enough to go back to investors and actually raise the money they need. So some games have, and we'll look at one of them. And the other ones is they were playable games, but it's so hard now to get anyone to play any new game because people are spending so much time, like particularly our kids, they'll play Fortnite. They'll play, every day they'll pretty much play Fortnite with all their mates, and that's the game that everyone plays sort of socially, and that's been the case for 5 years. They play Roblox. They play those games with all their mates, and Roblox is a bit different in the sense that you get it a bit with Fortnite now, new games coming in, but Roblox is obviously sort of almost like new mini games, and people cycle through these sort of new things coming. So they're just and obviously that's sort of kids more than adults, perhaps. But there's only so much time people have to play games, and there's those sort of games, and then there's Call of Duty, the sort of bigger sort of console games that people are playing, and there's just not a lot of spare hours in the gaming community for any new games, let alone something sort of slightly weird like blockchain. So. And that means marketing's very expensive, and all these companies are running out of money anyway, so they haven't got millions of dollars to spend on marketing to get people in. And even if they did, they know their retention's not good enough. So if they bring all these people in, those people are going to stop playing the game because it doesn't compete with Call of Duty or WoW or all the mobile stuff or TikTok or all the other things that people are spending their time on these days. So you just have this. It's really, really big sort of systemic problem. It's particularly for Web3 games because they didn't raise enough money, and they've got to this time frame now where they've literally run out of money. But anyone who's been looking at the games industry news, the games industry lost about maybe 10% of its sort of a workforce over the last few years. Maybe it's a bit higher than that. So there were too many people making games compared to the money being pumped into games in a whole, and Web3 is a particularly weird part of that. So. Yeah, so I just think one, it's obviously very sad when these companies shut down, but it's a part of sort of economics, and there were always miles too many Web3 games, and I just think sort of the wider point is people shouldn't get, from my point of view, I thought most Web3 games would always fail, because it's a very hard thing to do, and sort of we only need one or two Web3 games to prove the sort of the thesis that blockchain adds an interesting monetization, community, retention, ownership layer to games. And it's much harder than we thought it was going to be. Partly that's due to education of the audience, and that part's gone really badly. But we only need sort of a couple of games to start working, and then sort of the method changes. And so it's just, different from that point of view.
Wow, that was a long.
You knew it was coming. Yeah.
Yeah, just 2 points there. I think, like you said, it's important to sort of see that Web3 games will struggle even more with the retention and stuff because they're built on so much hype beforehand, and particularly if they've launched a token beforehand or in conjunction with a game launch, people see that token go down, they're gonna sell quickly, dump, and not look at that game again. And it's not that they might not, even give the game a real chance, because they've just decided that this project is dead already. So But I think developers are slowly sort of learning from those mistakes that have been made now for too long. That's not really the way to go. So hopefully that will kind of improve retention
And I will just say as well, I mean, the thing that does become increasingly clear as these sort of, weaker projects can't sustain themselves is the projects that can sustain themselves in various ways, maybe because they've raised more money. That would be sort of the key sort of thing at the moment. But ones particularly come from experienced teams who know how to make a game that works and is financially viable, and then coming to it and seeing how blockchain can add something to that. They're the ones who are standing out. I mean, you're wearing your lovely new Eve Frontier hat, so thanks to Leah for getting us our Eve Frontiers hat, and thanks to CCP for giving one to Leah. Yeah, and you love your new hat, so it's cool. But obviously, they're an experienced team of CCP Games have been making Eve Online for 20 years, and they've come in, they've raised 40 million, granted, but they've got a lot more than 10 people working on that game, and they're making a serious attempt to make, in some degree, the most ambitious blockchain game ever, because it's a fully open source blockchain game. Get onto the Avalanche conference that I went to this week, but there I bumped into Hilmar, the CEO, and had a quick chat with him, and he says that the process is going super well. He's really happy with it. Actually, it's engaging a lot of old Eve sort of players who weren't playing the Web 2 game. A long time frame for that game still to go. Big update coming in June, I think. But he's quite sort of happy with that. And we spoke a couple of weeks ago, about Wildcard. Those guys have been making games for 20 years, and they're making a Web 2 game, but they sort of they're using Web 3 around the outside. And there's proof of play. The guys who did Farmville, and there's the Faraway guys who did loads of sort of mobile games at Glue Mobile. And there's there just are these sort of projects of these people who've been in it 20 years. They sort of know what they're doing as much as anyone does. They've got the money to sort of build out, off the grid as well. And another game we'll maybe talk about a little bit about. But MapleStory, obviously, again, another one we'll talk about from Nexon. So we've gone from the situation where you more than me were running we ran this big blockchain games list for a couple of years, and it was just filling. There were more games than we could cover, and we were sort of filtering out to not the top 1,000, but that was sort of roughly the figure we were getting at, 1,000 games. But even within that, we knew there was really, if you were sort of serious about this, there were about 50 that we thought were, we called them the best, but that was sort of really like, these are the ones you should worry about, and all this other stuff, there may be a breakout hit from it, but probably not.
And I was going to mention the list, actually. Now, as you say, we've sort of stopped work on that because we're busy with too much else going on. But even there, so we're not really surprised to see, like you say, that blockchain games are inevitably, loads of them are gonna fail, if you call it failure, and have to shut down. So on the list, we've tracked over 600 games so far that have been discontinued, and we've tracked that from sort of end of 2021. We started running the big list, so this year then see that there's likely to be about 10 games or so far that have been canned. It's nothing surprising. It's in fact surprising to see that games are still managing to keep going, and some of them will succeed. That will be the sort of miracle in it. Not that some games have to shut down. So
yeah, and I remember, when was it? We put out a report saying that 32% of blockchain games have been discontinued. I mean, there was a lot of froth in that. But you are going to see, and I guess the shock with things like Nyan Heroes and certainly Ember was that game had been around for a long time. That game was announced, I can't remember, 2019, I think. That game was announced as a sort of project. And those games have sort of been part of the blockchain gaming sort of community, and I think we'll see some other ones. I wouldn't say like massively high profile, but ones that we've spoken about in the past, maybe ones that I've sort of played quite a lot of videos of. Some of those are just it's not, no one's done anything wrong. It's just a fact of life that they've run out of their investment money. They can't get any more money, and the game can't be monetized. Either the players can't be monetized, the players that they've got can't be monetized enough, or they can't bring in new new cohorts of players who they can monetize enough. And if your AI is not taken over yet, and just people who game developers are very experienced, coders and artists and stuff like that, and they are paid a lot of money. They're paid, certainly in the US, a lot of them are paid, $100,000 a year for senior people who sort of know what they're doing, and that just adds up. So it's I think in the Web 2 world, people don't realise how many games are sort of canned and sort of put out in soft launch and never seen again. Partly this thing is the visibility of blockchain games always talking all the time about everything. That suddenly when people go, they've not tweeted for a month. It's just like, because everyone expects blockchain games to be literally tweeting every day about something. Web 2 games don't even have a Twitter account.
That those studios actually making official statements on Discord or Twitter or forums. Those are doing the responsible thing in a way. They are very transparent with what's going on. And then there are those. I mean, I just looked through the big list actually yesterday. Had a really quick sort of scan down the list to see which ones are actually still tweeting, and more than half hasn't tweeted since 2024.
Yeah.
Which obviously, if I was to run down and do the sort of thing I used to do when I did actively update the list, they would be counted as discontinued now. And you do see people using that as a metric. If your social feeds have all gone completely quiet, you used to be active, used to sort of post a couple of tweets actually at least a week, and now you're all quiet. Well, that's a very bad sign, isn't it? But many of these projects are never going to make any official statements. They're just going to go quiet and appear quietly.
And I will just have a shout out that I think we'll see. I mean, we'll see how many of these games have enough sort of momentum to keep going in some form. But I will say, so Blast Royale, I don't think it was ever a very sort of, in some ways, sort of impressive game. I think it was, let's take a battle royale game and stick NFTs in it, and and that sort of worked. But they just, there wasn't a community around it. But they, and they have said they're going to open source the game, which is, can be a little bit like, so what? Here's the code. Go and do what you like with it. And I guess there is some degree of that. But equally, they don't have to do that. They could just not do that. So they there is some open source. The code means they're going to put the code in GitHub or wherever. Anyone can download that code and use it and make another game out of it and change it and put the artwork in. I'm not suggesting anyone would do that, but that is an openness that I don't think I think is more Web3, a sort of a more Web3 attitude than you would get with a Web 2 game. So I think there is sort of something there. And even, I mean, again, I'm probably reading too much into it, but again, Blast Royale, which is not something I've spent a lot of time on, they've just said, we'll keep our Discord open because there's a community here, and you might want to chat about other stuff. So, it was other ones, I think like Ember saw just like, we're shutting everything down, we're shutting the website down, we're shutting the Discord down, this is it, bye-bye. And there may be good reasons to do that because obviously legally you don't want your Discord if you're not running it and you've just got some mods and the mods go mad and start putting spam in, you may have some legal liabilities to that. So there's different ways of doing it. Obviously, the cleanest thing is literally just to shut everything down. But there is something in Web3 that is sort of like, well, if there's enough of us to sort of keep this going, or can you take over the servers? I mean, that sort of stuff does happen in MMORPGs. But it will be interesting to see if any of these communities can sort of on their own sort of reboot something or come together, or it is a feature in blockchain that we haven't really seen much of. So maybe there is an opportunity there for some of these games from that point of view.
Yeah, definitely. Right, let's move on to some more positive news then and talk about Voya Games, German developer, who announced this week they'd raised 5 million for their Craft World. And you've been playing plenty of Craft World. Now some of our children are even playing it, besides Roblox and Fortnite. So let's dive into a little bit about what that is, background, the lot.
Yeah.
That's all we need.
And this, I mean, this definitely fits into sort of what I was saying about experienced teams who sort of know what they're doing. So the guy behind, well, originally the project was called Angry Dynamite Labs.
Oh, I've got one of those caps. I forgot.
Oh, we have, haven't we? Yes, yeah.
Sorry,
I've got some Angry Dynamite socks as well. so in terms of what he was doing before, so actually they were quite an interesting team out of Germany, and I think it was Oliver, or Ollie as I call him, maybe that's a bit presumptuous of me, but Ollie, anyway, I think 3 or 4 of his university friends basically started making games companies when mobile was getting big, and they made it was a really funny, the original name of the company was something like Fluffy Pink Budgerigars. It wasn't that. I mean, it was a really odd sort of name for a company who have these sort of early 20-year-old guys out of Germany. It just sounded really odd. Anyway, they quickly renamed themselves to Calibri Games, but they made what we called mobile idle games. So an idle game is basically something you don't actively play. You're not controlling a character or armies or anything like that. But the game just sort of runs in the background, sort of on a timer. And every so often, whenever you come into the game, there's sort of something for you to collect, or there is you come into the game and there's decisions for you to make. But basically, things are running on timers, so you don't sit there just playing it. You sort of do something and then leave it and then come back in. So that was becoming a sort of a genre, and they did really well out of that. And they ended up selling the company to Ubisoft for over $160 million. So, pretty impressive. I mean, they built it up to a big team of like 100 people, but that, they timed the whole thing right, very, very, very sort of smartly. So it wasn't just Ollie, but his mates as well. And so he got interested in Web3 sort of in the early 20s. And I mean, I've done 2 podcasts with him. Going to set up another one fairly soon. And obviously, he knows idle games, so that was sort of what he was thinking of doing. And this what is now called Craft World has sort of come out of that. But I think one of the things that he has leveraged well in Web3 was having a game. The game's been running in testnet form for, I think, getting on for 2 years now. So testnet means it's running on a blockchain, but the blockchain doesn't really have any value attached to it. So they've been running on the Polygon blockchain. I don't think they're going to go live on Polygon. They've not announced what they're going live on yet. I think that will come fairly soon. But it's just a very sort of simple game. They have these funny, angry dinosaurs, so the sort of characters, a bit pixel art, and basically it's done through elements. So you have earth, wind, and wind. You have in the band. You have earth, water, and fire, and you start off with sort of the basic sort of elements of those, and then you sort of, the only one I remember is you go from sort of dirt to mud to clay to sand to, I can't remember, glass, or and you basically work your way up. So you have these different elements, and you need to sort of the factories make the element at a certain amount per minute, and then you take that element and you use it to make the next one, all the way up the chain. So it's sort of, as I say, an idle based game. That doesn't sound particularly interesting, and I guess it isn't from that point of view. But you're sort of you never have the resources you want. You're sort of having to level up your factories to make your dirt faster, so you can play faster. Blah blah blah. But then they have this idea of sort of meta things you're building. So they call them masterpieces. And normally there's one always going. So basically everyone in the game over a certain level can look at this, that they happen to be space rockets. Normally they're building, or computers or something. But basically there's a thing that everyone is building in the game, and it requires a colossal amount of resources. So just, no single player would ever have enough resources to make it themselves. But all the players together can sort of club to get, they need like, 1 million dirt and, 37 of the top, whatever, I can't remember what the top TNT is, or which is really hard to make. So all the players sort of club together, and then you get put on a leaderboard in terms of how much resources you've added into this sort of masterpiece, and then you get rewarded in-game items, but also you get like a badge of the thing you've made, which is obviously effectively an NFT. And they've also done these, I think 3 or 4 now, collaborations with external blockchain companies. So for most of those have been sort of token releases. So the top 100 people on the leaderboard to build the masterpiece get an allocation of a token that's going live. So it's almost like a launch pad where you're spending your in-game resources. And everything in the game is on-chain. So all the resources are effectively on-chain tokens. And then there's a gold token where I can sell my dirt to buy a TNT. I need an enormous amount of dirt in order to do that. And you do that through you sell your dirt and buy gold, and then you spend your gold buying the TNT. So it seems like a lot of these idle games, it's sort of, if you don't get it, you don't get it. So it's, it's not a game you're always progressing, but it's there's not really like a skill in it, but it's sort of quite satisfying. And whenever you go in, there's something to tap, so it sort of fills that little like I'm a bit bored and I've got like a minute to spend. And the interesting thing, obviously, with the NFT side of it is you have these events happening, and that sort of those are time limited. So once they're done, they're done. Once those masterpieces are fulfilled. So there's a bit of like at that point, you sort of all these resources you built up in the sort of just playing the game. You're like, I want to spend those quickly to get on the leaderboard to get whatever it is, the money or you could do NFTs through it or whatever. So yeah, it's quite because he knows the idle sort of game marketplace so well that he again like with a lot of the best people who are doing blockchain who know something really well, so can sort of see the challenges to make that genre better or make that community better for that type of experience, and realize blockchain can add something in. So the problem with idle games is how do you have long-term retention in these games? People just tend to churn out. It's not really that appealing to play those games for years. Whereas suddenly, if all this stuff has value, that's pretty cool. Nothing in the game would be super valuable, but having these sort of time-limited events, then you're sort of like quickly trying to spend everything and get really high up the leaderboards. Because obviously, if it only needs 10 TNT and someone else has put in 10 TNT, then you can't put in 10 TNT. so the resources you're building in the main game really have value when these limited events are going, because that's when you can sort of plug in and get external value. And anyway, I'm waffling on about it, but I think he's very clever. He had a very, very small team. That's the other thing. These sort of games don't need very much. So he had for many years had less than 10 people. So I think he raised $1 million to be a sort of seed funding a couple of years ago. He's really been wise in managing his team. I imagine now his team is not more than 20. I don't know. I have to ask him. But 5 million is clearly because people go, this guy knows what he's doing. He spent 2 years building this up. He's got it's not, I wouldn't say it's a massive community, but it's a decent community. They've launched a couple of NFTs back in the day. That sort of didn't work out in the way they wanted to do, because just NFTs stopped being sort of launchable. But those NFTs have held their value. I mean, I have some of those NFTs, and I think they're worth more than they were when I bought them. And it's going live in the summer and has lots of plans for doing sort of... the other thing with blockchain, obviously, is you have interconnected games. So it could do an idle game. It could also do maybe an RPG or something like that, sort of lightweight versions of those. And they're all connected with these resources and NFTs. And blockchain allows that interoperability. I'm really happy. Obviously, I'm really happy because I own some of the NFTs, but I'm really happy for him because I think he's really approached this in a good, steady manner. We need to see some successes to overcome this sort of doom.
That, among the investors was 1KX, which is invested a lot in Ronin, and Jeff Sterling was one of the investors. So do you think that gives a hint of where they might be going?
I don't know, actually. I mean, Jeff. I didn't realize Jeff actually is a sort of advisor or works with 1KX, who are a very sort of crypto sort of savvy investor who I had a few debates with one of their guys on Twitter about they have this whole thesis about Ronin and all this sort of stuff. So we'll see. I mean, I literally have no idea where they're going to go. I think obviously it would sort of play well into Ronin, without having a massive debate about Ronin. I mean, Ronin had a really good year last year and had a really bad year this year, like really terrible year, really. But that sort of idle games would work well where you want a lot of people and you're not expecting to monetize them very heavily. So for that sort of Southeast Asia market, which is big, but they haven't got tons of money to put in, this would work quite well because they've got a lot of time to put in, and they're going to build up this sort of big bank of resources, and the excitement when these things go live, I imagine could be quite good. And it sort of plays well into the Pixels sort of. I can imagine it having a similar audience to sort of Pixels as well. And again, totally making this up, I can imagine it being part of the Pixels ecosystem for Pixels. I mean, the good thing about when you have fewer blockchain games that people have a lot of have seen of sort of doing well, then you can sort of build these strong links between games that are doing well that makes everything do better. Whereas previously, a lot of the collabs have just been whole bunch of games you never heard of collab together, and you're just like, well, you know, two as the phrase goes, two drunken men holding each other for support, you know. Whereas these you actually feel like there's synergies.
Your advisor brain switched on today. Anyway, let's move on. Waffling on here. Let's talk about Off the Grid. They have announced they are coming to Steam in June of 2025, already live, obviously on Xbox and PS5, PC. So I presume this is without any NFT integration, because then they wouldn't be allowed to come to Steam.
Yeah.
But yeah, tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, it's slightly... go my big off the grid sort of rant. So they just put out a very short actually press release just saying Off the Grid's coming to Steam. In June. Wish list it now. I did write back to the PR saying I presume they've taken the NFTs out. And then I thought about it, and obviously they have, because Steam hasn't changed its attitude to blockchain. I've seen this other games have, that's always been a view that other games are, we'll release a Web 2 only version through Steam, and if people really get into it and want to do the Web 3 stuff, we can point them to our launcher or Epic Games or something like that. So clearly there's no blockchain in there. I mean, one of the reason to do it is obviously you widen your audience considerably, because there's whatever they quote 130 million registered users on Steam. Steam is the place where PC gamers go. So it's cross-platform. So someone playing on the Steam version of the game could play someone on the Xbox version. So it just makes it much easier for matchmaking and to make sure your servers are full and people get good games and all that sort of stuff. And if you're on an Xbox and I'm playing on PC and Steam, and it means we can sort of play together and stuff. So it's good from that point of view. They're obviously going to have monetization in there, just standard in-app purchases, which they have in all the other versions as well. But obviously, it's a bigger audience, so they can just make more money that way. It would have been nice to have had some sort of explanation of how, how it's going to work without blockchain. I mean, obviously, I guess what happens is it's an extraction shooter, so you go around shooting things and you get these hexes. That's the things you extract out of the game, and then you take them back, and then you spend money, the guns token, to decode them and get the things out of their NFTs. I guess just for the Steam version, you'll do all that, but the things you get will just be Web 2 skins that you can't sell. The only difference will be you can't put those on the marketplace, and maybe there'll be some information in the game saying if you get the Epic version of this game, you can sell these things in the marketplace. And we have started to see the first sales on the Guns mainnet, which has been live for a while now, and they started to migrate. Everyone's been playing on the testnet, so I mentioned the testnet before. The Guns testnet has been what this game's been operating on for the last year, and testnet means you can't put real value in it because all the tokens are just, you just make more tokens. It's a different environment. So they've started to bring, I think they've said invited the first 20,000 people from Off the Grid testnet onto the mainnet. It's not very clear. I mean, I'm not playing it, so I don't know. I don't know how. I imagine it's a simple sort of migration, but I guess you have to opt into it. Not quite sure. People who've been playing the game and have these assets probably would opt into it because then they can sell them. And we have seen the first sales. So I think the first sales of gun skins and stuff have been about $1,000. So I think there's basically limited skins for guns, and also in the game the limbs of the players, so the arms and the legs of these bionic players, are NFTs. So you can have like a grappling hook gun, a grappling hook arm, or a rocket launcher gun, or legs that make you jump higher, typical stuff. So we are starting to see some people trading these items, but it's very early days. So I looked at the Avalanche block explorer, because the guns. It's not guns. It's actually Gunz, they call it, the Gunz blockchain, I think. So you can see there's about 1,000 daily active unique wallets on there. So not a lot at the moment. But we are, with all these, and particularly with Off the Grid, because they've just done it in this very sort of staged manner, where it's taken them a long time to get people to where they eventually want to be, which is everyone running on their Gunz blockchain. So from their point of view, I guess it's sort of going in the right direction. But the other thing for Steam, the problem with Steam and why it may not be good for Web3 games to launch on Steam is there's a whole bunch of people on Steam who hate blockchain. There's a whole bunch of people on Steam who are quite toxic about various things, but particularly about blockchain. So even when the announcement went out, because you can do curated playlists, so I can, anyone on Steam can have their curated playlist and share that with other people. And the first person to create to sort of tag off the grid in a curated playlist was someone who tags blockchain NFT games. And I can't believe they were doing that because they love blockchain NFT games. They're doing it so everyone who hates NFT games on Steam follows this list, and then when they can go and review bomb it, they give it 1 star and go, NFT grift, hate this, destroying the planet, blah blah blah. So, and that just means the first reviews you get on the game are 500 people slagging it, giving it 1 star for NFTs, and so you can't ever get the discovery mechanics going. So it may not actually, it may be not worth doing it on Steam really, because these people, haters love to hate. So.
Yeah. And obviously off the grid, it's gone. The blockchain is built on Avalanche. So we're going to talk more about Avalanche now. Actually, the summit was this week in London, and you went there. You spoke to Nexon's, NextPay's CTO, and Dominic Jang about MapleStory Universe. And was it launched? Was it last week? MapleStory N?
A week ago.
Yeah, a week ago. It's doing well, isn't it?
Yeah.
But more importantly, you're not sort of so much about MapleStory N, I suppose. Tell us more about your chat with Dominic Young about MapleStory Universe, the kind of bigger vision for it.
Yeah, as I say, so it was I just sort of round it up. It was the Avalanche Summit London this week. I only went to the first day, which was the day where the main gaming stuff was happening. So it actually ran for 3 days in a really, really good conference in Hatfield House, a sort of grade 1 listed building, very famous English historic house where Elizabeth I lived and all this sort of stuff. But anyway, it was really, really, as you expect, I guess, from Avalanche, really well put together conference. And some sort of good speakers, not so much on games, but as I say, there was sort of an afternoon sort of session on games. And Off the Grid spoke, and MapleStory spoke, and a few other less well-known people. But I also had a chat with Dominic Yang, who is the chief product officer, I guess. Was he chief business officer? I can't remember. Chief business officer, I think, for Next Pace, which is the blockchain arm of Nexon, the South Korean game developer. So yeah, they seem pretty happy with the launch so far. So looking again at the Block Explorer, they're doing between sort of 30 and 40,000 daily active unique wallets on their own HenSys blockchain, which is based on Avalanche. So they're by far and away the biggest game on Avalanche straight away. They didn't give out any official figures yet in terms of sort of downloads or that sort of stuff. Their marketplace is sort of live. They've done about $1.6 million worth of trading so far. The most expensive item is about $6,000. It was a level 203 level character. So, they are obviously pretty happy. It's sort of interesting. I think for a big launch like that, you're just sort of happy there wasn't any big sort of problems. They were sort of talking very much about. We sort of just very happy. It's sort of we had to do some do a maintenance patch, and that was about it so far. So they seem happy from that point of view. And I talk a little bit as well about the token launch. So there was some criticism that they gave away too many tokens to people who weren't playing the game, and he sort of explained a little bit about that. They actually had to negotiate quite hard to give away as fewer tokens as they had. So they felt they had to give away some tokens in general to get the market going, but the exchanges all wanted much more. So there's a sort of interesting dynamic where you think, well, from the outside, you think these guys, what a bunch of idiots doing this situation, and from them, from inside, they know the problem and they're dealing with the reality of we want to launch on Binance. So that was sort of funny. The other thing, again, that they were a little bit undefined about was the game is geo-locked for lots of countries. So obviously South Korea, that's always been the case. Irony that the most crypto gaming friendly developers can't launch a game in their own country. Not available in Japan, not available in China, not available in the US, not available in the UK. think a whole bunch of other places as well. They didn't really want to talk in any detail about that. They just say, they look at all the sort of legal, regulatory issues in different countries, and obviously make a decision on whether they want to, launch in those territories. And some places, I think obviously the US is changing, I suppose, but maybe they're waiting for some of the new laws to go through. The UK, obviously not a massive market, but the UK has very specific sort of laws around certain things, and maybe that's just a bit of a hassle to go through that with your lawyers and build certain things out for people in the UK. So we'll just wait on that. They're getting a lot of people in Southeast Asia, as you'd expect, and a lot of people in Latin America, especially Brazil. That's interesting in the sense that that's sort of what we expect. We know a lot of crypto friendly, a lot of crypto is used in places like Brazil and Indonesia, Philippines, that sort of stuff. It's a PC only game, so that might limit them to some degree, that those people tend not to be so PC, more mobile. Also it limits monetization, so those people just generally don't have a lot of money to spend on games. So it may be, Nexon won't care at the moment. They just want to get sort of people in it and playing the game. And obviously, if you play the game, the game's quite interesting in the sense that you have to grind quite hard to get to, I think it's level 60, get your character to level 60, then you can mint it. And that's the point at which you can sell it. So I imagine there are people who are, really playing the game a lot to get their character as high as possible and get the really good gear, and then they can sell it and make money sort of that way. But the really interesting thing was, when I was talking to Dominic, and actually when he was doing sort of his interview on the stage, is they're not so, I would say their priority is not MapleStory N being a massive success. Their priority is MapleStory Universe, this wider sort of ecosystem around it. And what they really want to do is they want third-party developers and content creators, but at the moment, I guess developers more, to be building things using the assets they are creating. So an example would be, someone has submitted an example, a move to earn game using the shoes in MapleStory N as the sort of the asset, as in like Steppen famously on Solana had this sort of idea. So, whether that would be successful or not, who knows? But yeah, that's the sort of stuff there people are submitting, and like a lot of AI sort of stuff, and a lot of onboarding. So it is quite a complex game, and so those MMORPGs often have lots of sort of companion apps or things to automate stuff for you or make things easier. Only uses MetaMask at the moment, which is sort of a decision they took just because they thought that was easier and people understood MetaMask. They are going to bring in their own wallet system, so there will be a sort of an approved Nexon wallet system, but they couldn't do that in time, and they want to sort of test it all, obviously. So quite a lot of moving parts sort of around the game, and really they said in the long-term successes they want, if there's an app that's part of the MapleStory universe that's being used more than MapleStory N as a game, that is success. I mean, clearly that would be a massive success, but that's what they're trying to do, and they're breaking out the sort of the there's a thing in the game where you sort of enhance your items. At the moment, that's just a sort of feature within the game. The first thing they are releasing as a sort of third-party app will be to break that out as a standalone app. Whether, I don't know, it'll be a website or a mobile app, I don't know. But there's, they're really looking at this. Most people, a lot of people don't have time to spend 8 hours a day playing these games, and that's what those grindy games are like. MapleStory, it's not a game for a professional person who's got a busy life. But if they can take some of those aspects out and sort of break them out, so people can sort of choose what they want to do. The marketplace being the prime example, you don't need to play the game to be in the marketplace. You just need the tokens. So you could be trying to, you could just be trading stuff. You could go, I think this asset's going to get more, become more valuable, and so I'm going to buy this now and hold it and then sell it later, like people do with NFTs or whatever crypto. So it is. It was interesting to get that sort of idea. And the final thing was how they actually came up with it. Was they weren't going to make a blockchain game. They were thinking about how can we make these MMORPGs where we're not constantly spending loads of dev time and money building out this new content all the time, because players always want new content. So we're having to spend loads of time building out new content, and over time that becomes diminishing returns, because it becomes the people who've been playing for a long time have just loads of assets and they can go through this content really quickly, and it doesn't really satisfy them. And for new players coming in, it's just like overwhelming. There's just 20 years of assets in here, and so you end up with this sort of dividing sort of audience, and both of them sort of churn out. And obviously the only way you can get around that is by allowing other developers to come in and sort of have the same, access to the same, APIs or the same sort of assets, because they're blockchain assets. So you need to be able to build a system where other people can come in and create economic value in your ecosystem that makes your ecosystem more valuable. The developers get sort of paid directly because there's a sort of token allocation that they get through doing that, and it's very similar to what EVE Online are doing. Really, EVE's doing it in a much more sort of I don't know what the term is, but they're doing it in a sort of the vision is the same thing, to build out a blockchain based gaming ecosystem where the developer doesn't have control, and over time they have less. They have the same access to the game assets and the game systems as anyone else. So people are competing on basically making attractive apps that people want to use, or how skillful they are to do those sort of things. So waffle.
Yeah. We're feeding into sort of Avalanche's current momentum. Also this week, FIFA announced that they are building their blockchain on Avalanche.
They've launched it. Yeah, I mean, they've
gaming. Yeah, they have launched it. You actually spotted it ahead of the news.
Yeah. I mean, it was. Yeah, I was just saying very briefly. I mean that. Like these sort of conferences, that they can be a bit sort of wishy-washy, and some of it is just generally people talking around sort of what's going on in crypto. It wasn't like every talk was like banging on about Avalanche. But then the CEO was there. I think came across extremely well, extremely sort of measured in what he's trying to do, and I think they are, like sort of everyone is now. But I think there are not that many blockchains that you can sort of seriously take into the enterprise space or the institutional finance space. So I don't think. I mean, maybe people are doing that in Solana, but Solana has very much become the place where people launch meme coins and sort of degens live. Whereas I think Avalanche, it has this sort of structure. It has its sort of C chain, which anyone can use, obviously, but then you can use its tech and sort of break out and make your own chain, what they used to call subnets, but now they're just L1s. You can pretty much set up how you like using your own token. Don't even have to use the AVAX token. But he says that they are very much focused on those sort of institutional sort of use cases, and you can do obviously non-public Avalanche blockchains if you wanted to. I mean, JP Morgan has its own private blockchain. I'm not sure if it uses Avalanche, but there's lots of ways of mixing matches this sort of stuff, and it was quite impressive. Yeah. Did you say FIFA were using Algorand? They just ditched Algorand and created their own L1 chain, and there's big people like Nexon and Gunzilla doing their own blockchains. Beam is another sort of gaming ecosystem that uses its own its chain is a Avalanche L1. But there's quite these small indie games. So DeFi Kingdoms is a game that's been around for a long time, gone up and down. You started off on the Harmony blockchain, moved over to, it has a bit on Clayton, I think, still. But basically it's run its own L1 for a number of years now. I mean, it's not massive. It does about 10,000 daily active unique wallets, but
last week we mentioned Empires, not Vampires, finished building their Paradise chain, and Pixelmon announced recently they're bringing their whole games catalog to Avalanche.
Julio from Pixelmon gave a very good talk, I thought. They're just coming onto the C chain for their early games, and I think he said if they get up to, I can't remember what it was, they have some sort of idea of, I think, 1 million users or something, that they would run their own chain. So yeah, definitely. I wouldn't be. I just think a lot of people are going to be using sort of building on Avalanche. Probably you could sort of get the same stuff on Ethereum, but maybe Avalanche is just a bit more sort of focused and a bit more out of the box than building stuff on Ethereum is. And obviously Avalanche is EVM compatible. It was a good time.
Thank you all for spending almost an hour listening to us waffling on, mainly John. Obviously, there's been a lot more news this week. Go to blockchaingamer.biz to find out all of the stories. Go to GamesPX to get sort of much more valuable insights into the market, Web3 gaming market. And we'll see you all back here next week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.